Good morning. It is Wednesday, September 20th. We're here for our regular scheduled county commissioner meeting. We have all three commissioners present. We have our administrator, Mr. Gonzalez, and our clerk of the board. At this time, I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to please rise and join in the pledge. Okay, I'd like to announce first off that there are no phones available today. We have our two office personnel in training, and so we have nobody to man the phones down below for phone calls today. Apologize for that. Also, I'd like to announce that next Monday will be our bi-county meeting with Benton County on the 25th at 9 a.m. All righty, with that, we'll approve the vouchers.
Move for approval. Move for approval of fund expenditures in a total amount of $660,792.56 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the total amount of $1,194,759.59 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by two representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Moves us down to the consent agenda. There are two items on the consent agenda today.
Move for approval of consent agenda, two items as presented.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to approve the two items on the consent agenda with no discussion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Moves us down to regular business. We have a presentation here by Commissioner Amanda McKinney from Yakima. And she's going to be presenting on the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council sitting of alternative energy industrial complexes in ag ground.
Your button's in a different spot than mine.
Oh.
Good morning, Honorable Commissioners. It is my pleasure to be here with you this morning to speak about something that is of great concern, not just for Yakima County, but truly Central and Eastern Washington. And I do believe by the end of this presentation, you will agree that it's also a statewide issue that needs to be addressed. So for those who may not be aware, and good morning to everyone as well, I appreciate the opportunity to come from Yakima County to visit with you today. We have in our state a energy facility that actually was started initially for siting nuclear energy sites. And the idea is that nobody wanted to have a nuclear site in their own backyard, except for you guys. And so this siting committee was created by the legislature. It is politically appointed in nature by the governor, and the idea was that where would we put these things? Of course, we have these types of committees, exploratory committees happen all the time. We've seen them most notably, where do we put a new airport? This one is of greater significance because in Kittitas County approximately 12 years ago, Governor Inslee stretched his muscle and they decided to go ahead and have a wind industrial complex put in. You might recall that. Kittitas County declined the permit. The state sued. Washington State Supreme Court ruled in favor of siting the wind industrial complex across the beautiful hills of Kittitas County because it was a, quote, major energy supplier for the state of Washington. Fast forward to just a couple years ago, this obscure little committee is now being used to cite, quote, major energy facilities, which can be just a couple hundred square acres, anywhere they would like in the state of Washington. You can imagine with our sunshine where they are being cited. So we do have an influx of solar facilities now trying to come in. Why? Because of the money, because of the land, and our significant issue in Yakima County is that they are citing so far all of these energy facilities on land that is agriculture land zoned. And the reason why that's a problem is because it violates the Growth Management Act. So the Growth Management Act does state that agricultural land cannot be taken out of production. However, the Supreme Court the Supreme Court approval of the site in Kittitas County said that FSEC has the ability to violate the Growth Management Act, but they are the only ones who may do so. So what happens here is it puts us as counties in legal parity because we are not allowed to violate the Growth Management Act, and issuing a permit would be violating the Growth Management Act because we would be taking ag land out of production, but FSEC can. So this is a question that needs to be answered. So you can read here, and I'm not going to go, this is a 43-page slide, and I promise you I am not going to touch on all of the slides. So as I'm talking, you can go through and read some of these. And this, by the way, is we are going through, and some may know that we have a solar moratorium, also a lithium battery storage moratorium in the works because that is the next greatest thing that they are targeting us with. And I've taken a lot of time to attend FSEC's meetings, which are not a lot of questions asked or answers given to the public. All right, so we have had, unfortunately, some of these facilities are being cited despite the moratorium. FSEC's rationale being that they applied prior to the moratorium going in place, therefore they do not need to take into account the negative impacts potentially. So we are in the process of going through and creating an ordinance of how we're going to potentially cite these. One of the issues that we are coming up with, because we, unlike FSEC, and as you would do to protect your land and your people, you would start asking some very simple questions. We know that it conflicts with the Growth Management Act. We know that based off FSEC's current approval, lack of questions, lack of requirements and conditions for these sites that have already been approved, what does fire protection look like? The other issue that we have, as you well know, we have a water situation in the Yakima Basin, and our water rights in the state of Washington are heavily litigated. And to put it plainly, if you do not use your water right for its beneficial use, which is to say, for the purpose it was initially provided to you for, if you do not use it for the beneficial use for 5 years, that water right is relinquished forever, leaves the basin, gone, gone, gone. Some of the conflicts with the Growth Management Act, again, I'll gloss over this, but how does FSEC actually take into account what negative impacts there would be to the environment? They are acting solely upon authority from a single-page letter that was given from the Department of Ecology, which weighed in on these facilities, simply stating that they have no impact whatsoever, no impact. Any farmer have a SEPA review and would love to get a one-pager that said there's just no impact? Yeah. All right. All of our facilities in Yakima County have been in agricultural land. Another thing I should specify is the Growth Management Act. Some folks would say, maybe from the other side of the state would say, well, you know, it might be fallow land. It might not be important land. It would be important to note that the Growth Management Act itself does not specify and delineate between the quality of land. It does not say that grazing land is any less valuable than apples, any less valuable than hops. We do not designate the value of crops simply to say that we have decided decided a long time ago in this state that they are also valuable in their entirety, that we must protect all of them. We have already had, and that number is 6,500 now, acres of agricultural land. Yakima County specifically is first in the state for agriculture production. And the reason why this is important, of course, is we are all required to plan for progress. And we also have a good amount of folks who are constantly being told by our planning departments, you cannot do that with your land, you can't convert it to this. And yet we are coming in as a state and contradicting that and say, except for if you want to put in solar, lithium, or wind, in that case, it's okay for us to take ag land out of production. There's also concern, of course, for the natural environment that is presently undisturbed. That's not what this presentation is about. This is focused solely on the agriculture impacts. I'm going to brush through these RCWs. As we are going into a thought process of what we might do, there is clearly a need to determine if we're going to do this, what is the tax status? What is the impact to the local economy? What will it do to land values? So again, in keeping with the theme of it's fallow land, it wouldn't mean anything. A farmer perhaps hasn't been using that land or utilizing it. Perhaps they're looking at retirement. They don't have another generation ready to step in. The reason why this is important is because we are actually seeing an intentional design to flip what we're producing in Eastern Washington. So to say it simply, they're pitting farmers against farmers, because you might have someone who is maybe not wanting to farm the land, or I can say that the state of Washington hasn't necessarily been all too friendly to our farming community with heavy regulations involving water treatments, labor, all of these issues that we know that our farmers are facing. And so what's happening is they're coming in these large conglomerates, and do not be fooled, they are foreign-owned investors, and they are coming in and they are offering large lease options to these people. And they are saying, we will give you sometimes $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 an acre, a month. That's a lot of money. And when you think, okay, well, I don't want to farm anymore if I can sit back and let them use my land. And it's going to potentially drive up the cost of land, because let's say your neighbor decides, you know what, Joe's selling his land across the way, or he's willing to lease it. I'd like to put more apples out there. You will never be able to compete with the money that's coming in for these solar industrial complexes, because it is so heavily subsidized. So it will become a domino effect where people are going to be scrambling to get out of the business of farming so that they can lease their land out for these major complexes. Washington State has over 36,000 small farms, and at the last count, we were losing about 2 a day. That will only exponentially increase in central and eastern Washington, and we're seeing a massive influx of these applications coming through for these facilities. Irrigation obviously is a main issue that we are concerned about specifically. In Yakima County, we only get our water from snowpack. Let's see here. Lack of fire protection. We have no requirement by FSEC right now to make meaningful mitigation for fire, both fire that would come from the site facility, which of course we have seen in the news that these lithium storage batteries are highly combustible, and the main issue being that we do not have the ability to respond to these fires. So most of these farm areas are what we would call no man's land. You have them as well, which is to say that they are outside a fire district, and it would be up to the discernment and discretion of that fire department to respond to a fire. One special thing about these is that you cannot fight these fires with the normal and traditional apparatus that you would have if it were a wildland or brush fire. These require a lot of water. FSEC is not requiring that they mitigate to the point where you would have, and I actually had a great conversation with the Department of Natural Resources representative who indicated that they would have up to 20 or 50 feet sometimes of gravel track around the facility that would be prescribed. And the one that's going up in Yakima County right now, in fact, they declined to even require them to put gravel underneath the solar array because they were concerned about wanting to maintain that vegetation for the dwarf pygmy rabbit. But of course, it makes it more susceptible to fire. We're concerned about not only fire reaching these places and what they will do, but of course, I'm very concerned as many would be, about what happens to the toxicity in the air when we have these things combust. Will they? Absolutely. The Horseheaven Hills, which are strategically being targeted in this area for wind farm, have recently caught on fire. And as we know, living in this area, that fire is inevitable. It happens all the time, and it is great concern for our communities, and normally the farmers who are the ones there to put them out. And then we have potential loss of water rights. The last thing I will touch on is voluntary stewardship. So voluntary stewardship program, and it's too far down the slide, so I won't go. This is another concern, and it actually represents just the really nonsensical aspect of pitting certain laws against each other. So we all know that our farmers are environmentalists. They care very deeply for the land, and they're trying to work in harmony to make sure that they nurture that land to be able to provide and feed the nation. One of the issues in the state that we have is that the voluntary stewardship program allows for our farmers and our grazers and our operators to voluntarily comply with certain things that are provided to them as mitigating efforts for their impact on the land. One of the major factors to which they are judged as being successful and in compliance is that they are required to ensure maintaining of agriculture land. And if agriculture land goes out of production, they run the risk of losing their voluntary stewardship program status. And so if the state comes in and against county Growth Management Act and against county codes converts ag land to solar or wind or lithium storage, it diminishes the amount of ag land of production, which negatively impacts and puts in jeopardy our farmers for something that they had nothing to do with. So these are the major legal questions and the major concerns that we're working on. I'm here today because I'm going to be working on taking this message across the entire state. And the question that I think that needs to be asked of our state legislature, and the public should be asking this, is very simple. If our state decides that they want to pursue solar, wind, and lithium storage at the expense of agriculture, then I believe every resident of Washington State needs to know how much. How much ag land are we willing to convert to solar and wind and lithium storage? It's a simple question, and if you are a proponent for any of these energy sources, I think this is something you still would like to know. You will change fundamentally the look of the entire state, because you won't come to Yakima Valley or to Benton and Franklin counties to wine taste. There will be no wine grapes. You won't drink Yakima Valley hops in your beer. They'll be coming from Belgium, because we won't be growing hops anymore in the state of Washington. These are real issues, and it's very simple. So I will be asking you to join me in the next couple months. I would like to see us build up momentum heading into the legislative session that will begin. But it is time that every person in Washington State understands that to reach the goals that have been given to us by our state legislature and by our governor, we will have to convert ag land to the point where we will no longer be the #1 agriculture producing area in the Pacific Northwest. And I yield to questions.
Questions, commissioners?
Great presentation, and very informative. Because of my involvement in solar, I've abstained from being involved in it, but yeah, very good point, and I support you. But like I said, because of the conflict of interest, I've stayed out of it. But great presentation, and people do need to be aware of what's happening. So, you have my support, so thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mullen.
So, few observations. One, I echo Commissioner Mullen. Great presentation. I looked at the slides you provided ahead of time.
All 43 of them.
And yeah, it's a great summation of what is in there. There is a natural tension that exists between interests. And those of us, you and myself, serving on the Ledge Steering Committee for WASAC, see all these different issues, and we see them alongside the total 39 county representatives, and it's interesting to see how the interests of one side of the state or one region get a lot more attention than others, and it's because we often don't do a good job of putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes. There's a famous conservationist from the 40s named Aldo Leopold, and he once said, when it comes to reforming, the first thing that people do who have power is they look for something that doesn't impact or affect their way of life, and then, brother, can they reform? And I kind of see that in the state's approach to how they apply the GMA selectively and the creation of FSEC. And the power that FSEC has, it was sold originally for the benefit of being a one-stop shop for all the different permitting activities, but what it has turned into is political muscle. And because the appointments are from the governor, you can begin to see how the interests throughout the state might not be fully represented by all of those. I think the interesting comment that you made about the water rights, and from your notes and from some previous experience, I'm aware that those water rights can be moved into a trust, but even then it's not permanent and it's not guaranteed, and you've got to have somewhere else to move them or sell them or use them. And if you continue to build solar panels over high-quality ag land, pretty soon there's no land to water. That's maybe a bit extreme, but I think it's true. The thought occurs to me that because of what I said a minute ago about LSC and how we tend to try and stay in that middle third, it's hard for 39 counties across the state to take on issues that are far right or far left politically or socially or economically. But this one seems to me that has enough impact in the middle ground that I think you in particular, but both of us, will be at the Wasatch Legislative Steering Committee meeting tomorrow in Ellensburg, in which we'll be working to further refine our legislative agenda for next year. And I think it'd be great if you rose on this particular point and suggested that we add this to the agenda. I'm kind of smiling because I know you well enough to know that you've already thought this through and you're already planning to do that. But I think it needs to be looked at. As familiar as I am with GMA and with water rights and with power development, I really hadn't given enough thought to the water rights issue, and that's probably as big in my mind as the issues involving the consumption of ag land or the fire hazards or anything else. Some people have argued that wind production uses such a small footprint, it's not a problem. That's debatable. But certainly solar has a much bigger footprint for the amount of power produced. And so I've heard arguments that solar is not a real concern either because they're not considered, in some people's minds, a permanent infrastructure, that you build them, you use them for a period of time, and then you remove them. I'm still looking for that major solar project in the U.S. that has been removed since we started building large-scale solar projects. I don't think any have been. So I guess in summation, I'll just say I think this is a great issue. I appreciate you bringing it up. I think many of us who have been in the county business for a number of years have underestimated one of the key elements, which is the water issue, and looking forward to supporting your discussions on this topic in Ellensburg tomorrow.
Thank you, Commissioner Peck. Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, may I respond quickly?
Absolutely.
I would just like to say that a lot of this, the illogical and the lack of consistency in application, to put a more finite point on it, it is considered acceptable to take the ag land out of production because putting these facilities on them, they could easily be taken away and reconverted. I would love to see us tell someone, well, you can't actually build a house on that land, and they come back and say, but I can just tear the house down and convert it back to the land that it was originally. We don't allow it in any other case. If it is zoned a certain way, and you will start to see people saying, well, wait, I could easily convert my land, or the argument is that it's more beneficial, I'll make more money off the land. Well, if my home is built on a lot that is zoned R1, and I decide I would like to make more money, I will just say, well, I would just like to build a fourplex instead. And the fact that it was zoned R1 doesn't matter because it's all about making more money and using the land that I own for its most valuable state without going through the process of rezoning. So it's just an illogical and inconsistent application of the law.
Again, I want to thank you for a great presentation. The attack on our water rights is not new. In the 90s, they accused the farmers of water spreading because we use pivot irrigation, which is a more efficient way of using the water, more conservative. And they accused us of water spreading because Class 6 ground, which might have been a high piece of ground from the real irrigation that we used to use, they said we were water spreading. We were actually stealing the water because the pivot walked over it and watered it. So they accused us of that in the 90s. In 2000s, they introduced these buffer zones where they want to put a buffer along every open waterway. Can you imagine that out here with the canals that we have? They would put us out of production. Earth Justice, where's Earth Justice on this? Why aren't they joining it? Because they sued us when we were trying to do our rezoning out here and increase the city limits. They sued us because we are encroaching on agricultural lands. Where are they at? Another thing is lithium batteries. Where's one more bullet point you need up there is pollution. When it blows up and the pollution, we need to emphasize that because it is going to happen. Lithium batteries. The solars and the windmills, honestly, they don't even make a pimple on these Snake River dams behind. So I'm with you. I thank you for defending the farmers because if people like to eat and they got to survive, they better be concerned about the farmlands. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Welcome. Thanks.
One last thing before you leave.
Yes.
You have a lawsuit going on right now about the costs for
Which one?
Yeah, well, I thank you for doing what you're doing, Amanda. You are a warrior, and we thank you. But the one for reclaiming the costs of these courts for our criminal justice, I'm asking Mr. Gonzalez and the other commissioners to reach out to every organization that they serve on, and we need all of Eastern Washington to join and maybe become amicus brief to your lawsuit that you're with Pacific, and what's the third county? There's 3 counties that are involved in it.
I'm so sorry.
We need every county
We
to
do.
join in on this
Yeah.
and make a statement to this state that we are not going to pay for your foolishness. You've got to pay for it. Because they're the ones that are demanding and putting all the stuff on us that we can't prosecute for this. We've got to release them for that. We need to join you on this lawsuit.
Well, I have a few others I would like to invite you to join as well, so that'll be another time.
You keep going. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, commissioners. I appreciate your time.
Thanks.
All right, that moves us down to Trinity Orozco inter-budget transfer due to grant award. Ms. Orozco.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is not going to be that exciting. I simply need the ability to transfer some funds to our budget so that we can pay out what we will receive from the grant. So we can either do a monthly or quarterly request for funds from AOC based on that grant. But in order to hire somebody or to buy the computer that we need to do, we need access to Franklin County funds, which will then be monitored and reimbursed at the end of that program. So I worked with Tim Anderson, and he assisted me with the resolution to get the funds available so that we can start using the money from the grant. There's also a request in here to allow transfer to OPD so that the grant can help support or can support the public defender position, which is allowed within the grant.
Questions, commissioners?
Do you know offhand the split between the money for OPD and prosecution side?
What do you mean the split? I spoke with the prosecutor's office, and appears to me, based on what happened this last year as far as the lack of prosecutors available, the additional funds that were received, that they were in a good position and that they would be able to support their position. So we're looking at spending this on the OPD attorney and then whatever positions we need to fill. At the end of the year, if we get to the point where, or Mr. Sant discovers that he needs additional monies to pay for the prosecutor position, then we can add that in and then make a request when we renew our grant request. The biggest concern here is making sure that we spend all of that money so that when we go back in, we can explain, well, we did this much, but we really need help with this position, and then we can request additional funds.
So if I understood, 100% of the current money is going to OPD?
No, well, we'll pay for the OPD position, contract position. We'll be paying for the case coordinator and case manager. We'll be paying for, there was another position, a partial payment of the probation officer. And then in the grant, we're allowed to transfer 10% of that to any category that we feel is appropriate.
Okay.
If we have additional funds and the prosecutor's office needs it, they can definitely let us know and we'll figure out how to get that in there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, what is the total amount on the grant? And has Mr. Anderson been able to answer all our questions with respect to creating an account to work these funds through? And do we have the cash flow in the county to fund this? I assume we do.
Total amount of grant.
281,000.
Yeah, that's what I thought, right around there. I know I work with Trinity, Judge Roscoe respectively, and Tim within my transfer authority. So I think it's $25,000. So we're able to adjust some line items that we had to create. You know, in terms of cash flow, it's there. So that's not an issue. I think mechanically what we're going to have to figure out, and I'm sure AOC will be pretty timely with the reimbursement process. So those monies are allocated and set. So I don't see any fiscal problems.
And I met with Mr. Anderson for over an hour on one day, and then through email and another opportunity to meet with him, he scheduled some different line items so we can address it and put it in the appropriate spot, because there is something like treatment services, which the county wouldn't traditionally have. So he's kind of figured out where we're going to put that. And he actually is the one who helped put this together to make sure that everything was working within the parameters of the grant and also the county's requirements.
So would we be drawing that from the contingency account?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
I have no questions.
If there are no more questions, I'd entertain a motion.
Move for approval of Resolution 2023-260 as presented.
Second.
Been a motion and second for Resolution 2023-260. Without further discussion, if there is none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, that moves us down to presentation from the Colville Tribal Casino, presented by Cody. Cody, help me with your last name.
Desatel.
Desatel, Executive Director for the Colville Tribes.
Good morning, Commissioners. We just wanted to give you guys an update on where the Pasco project is. We haven't been here for a while, so we thought we'd come and share what we have for you, and also to show you a little design about what it's going to look like. And hopefully you had a chance to look at the website where the project was. And also, we do put together a live website. It's called thepascoproject.com, that there's more pictures of what it could look like, and also there's some videos out there that you can watch. So anyway, the last time we were here, Cody was the Natural Resource Director. And in this time, we had lost our Executive Director. And so Cody is now the Executive Director, and also he is in charge of the Pasco project. So he's got a lot of shoes to wear. So anyway, thank you for, letting us be here today.
Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you, Commissioners. Good to see you again. Been excited to give this update. It's been a long time. There's been a ton of work that went into our fee to trust application. Essentially all of it confidential until it was submitted to the BIA. And we are working on what will be an environmental impact statement that we hope to have a draft for here in the coming months that will allow us to share even more. And because we're at this point, we expect to see you on a much more regular basis to provide updates. So I'll start by apologizing on the title slide. I forgot this was a PDF and didn't get a chance to change it to the county commissioners versus the Franklin County Sheriff. So apologize for that one, but otherwise the content is the same. This is, I think, the fourth time we've given this presentation to make sure that we had all of our partners up to speed. So just a little background for those that in the room that may be new and maybe just recollect some of the information we shared earlier, that Colville is a confederacy of 12 separate tribes with territories scattered across northeast Oregon, most of eastern Washington, and parts of southeastern British Columbia, Palouse, Moses, Columbia, and Chief Joseph Band of Nez Perce, most notably, that were in this area. Another refresher, we bought 4 total properties on the east side of Pasco, just off of 395. So the gaming project is intended to go on the 160-acre parcel, and we've got another application in for fee to trust conversion for the additional acreage. The only thing that we have immediate plans for will be a convenience store at the 6.58 acre parcel, which will now be across from Love's because they didn't have to go through any federal processes, can get through the permitting considerably faster than we could. So in total, I think we had just shy of 200 acres that we purchased and are working on converting all of that to trust. So we've done a lot of work over the last few years trying to make sure we understood priorities of local governments, of the community, how we would fit into that, and what we could accomplish together through this project. So we've got a number of agreements in place over the last couple of years. They, for the most part, structure how we will communicate, how we will work together on this project. But to date, we've got an agreement in principle with the city of Pasco, a letter of intent from Franklin County PUD. They said they had a need for a substation over there to increase just capacity in their transmission system. So we have a site designated for them so they could build that substation. We have a cooperation agreement with the Franklin County Sheriff on law enforcement and public safety issues, an agreement with the Port of Pasco, and a municipal services agreement with the city of Pasco to make sure that we utilize the new development they put out there for public systems, both water, sewer, and otherwise. And update on the fee to trust process. As I noted earlier, this is a lengthy process. It's a 16-step process for what they call the 151 regulations, which is the off-reservation fee to trust. We put a ton of work into that application. It's volumes of material. Now sitting with the BIA, we submitted that to the regional office in early April. We've made good progress on that, faster than I expected, so we're thankful for the regional office for being diligent about that. We're at a step, I think about 9 or 10 in that process where we have to take a pause. Since this was property that was purchased after 1988, after the passing of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, we have to go what they call a 2-party determination. So there has to be a separate approval process to use this property for gaming, and it takes approval by the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs and a subsequent concurrence by the governor of the state. It also takes a NEPA document that analyzes the environmental impacts, takes into account all of the public comments that will be received, and then the federal government will be required to respond to all of those comments. So we did submit a notice of intent to the regional office. That's been about a month or so ago. We hope to see that on the Federal Register here in the next month or so, and that will kick off the public scoping process where the community will be able to give feedback on the project as we have it proposed. It will help inform our preferred alternatives or range of alternatives as well, and ultimately will end in a final EIS and a record of decision that explains all of the potential environmental impacts, if there are any mitigations we will have for those, and then what the selected or preferred alternative will be for development. Once that process is complete, we can complete the 151. process, which would be the federal government taking the land into trust, taking the title to the property in the name of the Bureau of Indian Affairs and United States. So these take some time still. We've moved quickly, but I expect that based on the rules that are still in the books from the prior administration, the environmental impact statement will take us about a year. The 151 and 292 will take, well, the 292 will take less time, but the 151 won't be able to complete until we have that final EIS complete. So we've got some work to do yet, but again, as we work through this process, much of the work we've done will become public, so we'll have the opportunity to share more and engage more and get feedback on what this potentially looks like going forward. So next, just some ideas we had, and again, all of this will be subject to the public scoping meetings we have, any environmental impacts or concerns that we identify as part of the environmental impact statement process. But we thought it may look something like this. A preferred alternative may look something like this. So the left diagram is generally what would be an aerial view of the property. So there would be a hotel casino located in the center, parking and otherwise around, and then some of the amenities. Picture on the right is an aerial view of what we would expect the facility would look like. Again, that's a pretty plain Jane version of what the facility could potentially look like, but what the final facility looks like, again, will be informed by that public scoping process and the communication we have with our partners as we work through development. Tribe's vision for once it's completed. So this is what our architects came up with. We think it would look something like this. Picture to the left being the view in the front as you enter the casino. You can see the hotel to the left. Have shared the height of that with the airport officials, so we don't expect to run into any issues with height. And the picture on the right would be a view from the back. So a bit of a holding pond for landscaping, an outdoor pool, and again, all of those informed and evaluated for their environmental impacts. So moving on, some final thoughts. As we make progress, we'll continue to engage here. I expect that we'll probably see you every few months or so, depending on how fast the federal process is moving. Continuing that engagement at this level with the city, with the port, with other local partners. Once this project's complete, we expect it to provide a pretty substantial amount of economic growth for the Tri-Cities area. So when we've seen these projects go into other areas, particularly one that has a potential gaming market that Tri-Cities does, that they generate a considerable amount of revenue, they can generate a considerable amount of jobs. The feasibility studies we looked at, it expected there would be a couple thousand jobs during the construction portion and several thousand jobs once the project is complete for both direct and indirect services. So should be a big economic driver, should employ a lot of local citizens. It'll help bridge the funding gap we've got at the reservation. The reservation is located in two of the most economically depressed counties in the state, so there's not a lot of opportunity to generate revenue up there to make sure that we have the ability to meet our tribal government obligations to our membership. But we also recognize that with that revenue under our compact, there's a mandatory 2% sharing, so there's opportunities to contribute to the communities that we're located in as well. So we'll have conversations about what that looks like as we get close to the end of the project. And then again, increased contributions back to the members in the community. As we have more revenue, as we have more flexibility, we can help fund other priorities, whether those be priorities at home or priorities in the local community. So we're excited to get to that point. We expect this will be a successful business once it's up and running, and will give us the opportunity and flexibility to do things that we haven't done in the past. And that's all I have for you. Questions?
Questions, commissioners?
I've heard a couple different versions or answers to the question about trust land status. My understanding is that if you develop this land and it moves into trust status, well, let me just ask it as a question, because I've heard two different answers. Does that require any sort of an offset from your existing trust lands, or is it just in addition to existing trust lands?
in addition to.
Okay, all right. So I've one person early on said there had to be a one-for-one trade-off somewhere else in the trust land, and I didn't think that was the case, so thank you for clarifying. You mentioned a mandatory 2% sharing. Is it generally, I guess, ordinary and accustomed that developments of this nature throughout the state and the region generally contribute more than that mandatory minimum?
Tribes typically don't share that information. I think you'll see like signs around Spokane, you see what Kalispell has contributed back to the local community. So they don't give us exact numbers, but the intent when they developed those templates for compacts was that because it was such an economic driver and there was a lot of revenue generated from it, that those revenues would be shared with the local community, not just for the tribe. And I suspect they probably do more, but I couldn't speak for sure to what that is. And the casinos we have now, we have 3, but they're small. They don't generate much money. This would be considerably better than all 3 of the current casinos we have combined.
Well, clearly there are indirect economic benefits. I don't want to be dismissive of that. There's a lot of jobs and revenue stream, but the 2% number was not one I'd heard before. So I was going to ask you about the airport, but I took a quick look at the map and it looks like it's offset enough from our primary runways that, do you know offhand what the planned height of the structure is, the hotel?
101 feet and 3/8 of an inch.
Okay.
And we shared that with Buck, so we hope we have that covered. He said as long as we're less than 150, he thinks we're probably fine.
Yeah. Well, I fly in and out of this airport, and generally about where the hotel is, if you're not close to 1,000 feet, you're probably lower than you're supposed to be. Okay, thank you.
Where are your other casinos located?
We have a small one in Cooley Dam, one in Okanagan, and then one in Manson. All on, well, 2 on reservation. The one in Manson is on allotment in the former Moses Columbia Reservation.
Who owns the one in Chewelah?
That's a Spokane tribe.
Can't try.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right, well, we thank you very much for coming today and giving us an update.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, I did have one other quick question.
Absolutely.
The EIS process, I've seen them drag out for years. This one, given the nature of the development, the location of the development, doesn't seem like it's going to be a particularly problematic one, just my opinion, having done a couple of them for the DOD. But do you have any sort of an estimated timeline, what you're planning for that EIS process to get you to the record of decision?
So under the past administration, it required that the federal agencies have those complete within a year. So that rule is still on the book. So we
Okay.
expect they will maintain that timeline. But again, that clock won't start until that notice of intent is published in the Federal Register. So we're working very diligently to make sure we have all of the information in line, ready for the federal government. So when they need it, we have it. We have a contractor on board that's done a ton of these nationally. So we know the process. They know the people in the federal government that they need to talk to about this. So we'll move it as quick as we can.
Yeah, and just last point, I noted, and I very much appreciate the fact that you spoke equally to the preferred alternative and whatever alternative might be chosen. That shows respect for the NEPA process. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good seeing you. All right, the next item on the agenda is the ordinance 07-2023, amending Title 17 of the FC Development Regulations, Section 17-58-080. Mr. Bratton.
Thank you. Yes, this is a, okay, so on August 23rd, staff presented to the board a request to reduce the minimum set aside of open space for a planned unit development, otherwise known as a PUD. The minimum, all planned unit developments have a requirement of all of ours do, have a minimum set aside of, or open space set aside requirement of 35% currently. A request was made that we amend it to reduce it to 15%. when we brought it, that was initiation of the hearing regarding this, went through the planning commission with a recommendation of approval. It was brought to the board, however, in the packet submitted to the board at that time, there were packet of comments that had come in after. So what the board received was the original planning commission packet that was sent out to the planning commission prior to us obtaining those. The hearing and the comment period runs up until basically the night of the hearing. So we received a packet, well, what became a packet of comments in the interim, which were hand provided to the board or the planning commission, and were also entered in as part of the record. Unfortunately, that packet was not provided to the board on the 23rd. Staff has since rectified that. We have provided you that, I believe it was last week or the week before. And those comments were included. So on the 23rd, the board tabled this matter, and we're now bringing it back since we have provided you with the information that was requested. And we do apologize. It's not common that that happens, but unfortunately, it just wasn't included when the pack was put together for the board. And so here we are today, hoping that we can take final action regarding this matter. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I also do have the PowerPoint presentation that I brought if you wanted or had any questions regarding that presentation, or if you wanted me to go through that again.
So if I remember right, we are in a open public hearing that'll have to be closed.
Correct.
Yes.
That's my understanding.
So it's open to the public to speak also, but first the commissioners.
Correct.
Is questions, commissioners?
So, Derek, would you confirm this is not quasi-judicial? It is not closed record?
Correct. This is a legislative matter. It's a matter of
Just-
policy for the county.
I just want to get that on the record so that people know that they're free to comment and that we're not constrained to speak just from the record that's currently
That is correct.
established.
That is correct.
Okay, in your package, you included an attachment A, design standards and requirements. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these, and try to do this quickly, but I'd like to walk through those with you so that we all have a clear understanding of what these mean.
Is this,
This is attachment A to the
ordinance.
to the draft resolution.
Okay. Okay. I've got it.
You ready? Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one, under subdivision requirements, it says, if land or structures within a proposed planned unit development are to be sold to more than one person, partnership, firm, corporation, or to include the dedication of land in a proposed planned unit development, shall be subject to the short plat or major subdivision ordinances. Excuse me. Is there anything in those existing short plat and major subdivision ordinances that conflicts with the lesser open space of a PUD?
No, this is articulating that though the PUD is a process, of negotiation, it still has to adhere to, basically, if you create more than 4 lots, then you could potentially that's our understanding of it, what's articulating. It's basically the subdivision rules, the densities, those still apply to these regulations. But no, there's no conflict. There's nothing in those various subdivision regulations in Title 16 that even really speak to PUDs. It's just, it's a process. Depending on the specifics of the application is the one you would look to, I guess is the best way of putting that. Because there's all sorts of different styles of PUDs out there.
Yeah, so where I'm stuck is because it says the proposed PUD shall be subject to the short plat or major subdivision ordinances. So any ordinances we have on the books with respect to short plats or major subdivision ordinances would apply here. And then I go down to item echo, lot requirements for minimum lot areas, lot dimensions, building heights, lot coverage, yard requirements, open space requirement. a lot of these things, as I recall, are addressed in those short plat processes, are they not? And when we talk about whether you can park on one side of the street or both sides of the street, we talk about what the setback distance is from the front of the lot, all those kinds of things. Are you comfortable that item A is not in conflict with any of these others?
And I misinterpreted item A. I've just reread it. What this is saying is, so we've created a PUD, right? Mm-hmm. Then somebody comes along and wants to break a chunk of that off. Depending on how or what, or the number or level of area, or say they're breaking off multiple lots, like say 15, and creating effectively a new development, those regulations would apply at that time. This does not speak to the matter of how the PUD is formed. It is speaking to the matter of saying, just because it's a PUD doesn't mean that you can lop off chunks of it or further subdivide it without going through the short plat or subdivision process.
And you know, that's how I read it when I first looked at
I
it.
apologize, I missed
No.
a couple words
Well,
there.
but I still have a concern,
Okay.
because you're saying now that you've got an existing PUD and you want to come in and take a piece of it off and you want to sell it to some other entity, except that it says if land or structures within a proposed PUD, not an existing PUD.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone is proposing a PUD
Mm-hmm.
and it's likely going to be sold to multiple interests because there will be individual housing lots within the PUD, presumably, right? So it seems like it applies, and as I look at these others, maybe I just don't have a good enough understanding of what the short plat and major subdivision ordinances are, but you've been doing this longer than I have. We've both been doing it a while. I thought there were things in those ordinances that spoke to setbacks and roadways and widths and so forth.
Those are actually in the zoning.
Okay,
The setback requirements are health and safety generally, and
Okay.
minimally also aesthetics. But the primary purpose is life and safety fire control, generally speaking. Structural separations.
so when we do those short plats, we don't look at lot size?
No, we do look at the lot size. And that comes into the regulations associated with, you've got, again, 10-acre site. The zoning says you can have, we'll say it's RC1. The zoning says you can have 10 lots. However, the subdivision or the zoning code also says that it shall be of a specific size. This is where the PUD process shifts the dynamic. You're still limited to 10 units. But if you have a concept and you're able to meet the minimum life safety requirements and other elements, then you have the ability to say I've got a 10-acre site, 7 acres of it's a lake. Well, I can't really build 10 units under the standard process. So what the lake becomes is the open space. In theory, people can fish or play in the water. And then they can still get their 10 units, but they're either going to be like condos, cottage style, maybe they're smaller lots. Well, then those trigger other dynamics, such as, well, if it's less than an acre, then you're going to have a public water system. You can't just drill a well for each of those properties. So there's things, so it creates this, there's special development proposals that are based on the specifics of the situation or the property and or the proposed use. So that set-aside requirement is just one of the things to give them a potential bonus. But they're all required to have some sort of set-aside. It's just a matter of whether or not. So PUDs have some formulaic aspect to them. You must do X, Y, and Z in order to get A, B, and C. But there's not necessarily a requirement for them to implement all of them. But at the same time, if they don't implement at least minimal ones, then they're not classified as a PUD, and they would have to go through the normal land subdivision process based on the specific use they're looking for. Planned unit developments are most often what you'll also see, say like a mixed-use development will often be a planned unit development, where you've got that mix of retail, office space. That's more of in an urban setting. In a rural setting, you're going to see more like a resort situation, generally speaking. I mean, if you're having a mix of uses. Or maybe even like a condo development that's got recreational facilities utilizing a large amount of the open space. These types of setups are often what are done through a planned unit development process. All of them can be done also through a standard build process or a conditional use permit or in other mechanisms. What those processes don't allow for is the potential for a density bonus. Generally speaking, on a plot of land, about 20% of it's going to be used up in open, like front yard, infrastructure, roads, these types of things. And that 20% increase can kind of like level that out as well, to where they actually get a true representation of their acreage. So it's because that's, again, those roads, that infrastructure, it's public. It's used by the public, or it's at least used by the residents within that development. And generally, if it's being used by more than one, it's kind of, well, can be considered public, depending on the number of units and stuff.
So I think we have a difference of opinion on whether or not those roads in a planned unit development are public or not. They can be gated communities, and
And
then it's by invitation.
Right.
The setback requirements between structures, I'm sure are bounded by fire code and other health safety issues. But other than that, their normal setbacks and spacing don't apply. Is that correct? In a PUD, you got the 20-foot setback from the front.
Right.
And you're going to have a certain amount of setback for fire. I'm just guessing, but unless it's a zero lot line, you're 5 feet up on either side with 10 feet total.
Yeah. So it's 25 in the front, 25 in the rear. Those setbacks, they're certain. They wouldn't be able to go beyond a certain threshold unless they design the building to accommodate the fire separation requirements. But when it comes to the rear property lines or things like that, there's nothing in the code that says they can violate those. That would be something that would be more at the will of the specific situation. A lot of planned unit development is about, this is what we're proposing. Well, here's the concern we have with that proposal. How do you mean to address that? Then they come back and they go, we're going to do these things. And then, okay, that's different, but it still meets the same intent.
Yeah. So item C, Charlie, says that a planned unit development shall be exempt from the minimum lot size and setback standards, except in cases where there's on-site parking is located in front of the structure, and then it has to be 20 feet. So
kind of what I was trying to say there. You can't violate safety requirements, but there may be situations based on the way they've laid things out. Prime example would be, say they decide to do a condo setup or triplexes or something like that. The parking, and then they have like on-street parking that's designated for each unit. Well, that unit's only going to be probably 10 foot off the curb. But it also could be 30 or 40 feet off the property line. And then the structures may have, 20 foot between the structures or something like that.
So our common area or common use recreational structures, facilities, are they counted in the 15% for open space?
I read the language to say not necessarily. If you located one in your 15%, then it would just be, but it says open space and gross land area for common open space. Open space is not in a building. If they were to put in a rec center in their open space, I could see where that would be, you know, getting
That
them-
would come out of the 85%, the balance,
It
the
could,
developed
yeah,
area, if it's
yeah.
a structure.
I mean,
I'm not aware of anything that says the use of the structure defines whether it's open space or not. The fact that it's a structure defines that it's not.
Right, but it depends
Okay.
on the type of structure. If we're doing, say, like a big gigantic bandstand,
Yeah, a gazebo, for sure,
setup.
yeah.
But if we're talking a
building.
Parks and Rec facility, but then again, maybe you want to have a commercial kitchen there so that you can do certain events. These types of things, but it would not count as the open space. I could see maybe where we would agree to allow them to build a structure and not take that away because it's an amenity needed to utilize the space.
Okay, well, I've got other questions, but I'm going to pause so that other people can have a turn here.
So how do we compare with other counties as far as our open space?
Our current requirement is very large compared to most other surrounding jurisdictions. It's, if they speak to the matter, we're over twice.
Over twice.
Yeah, 35%. Trying to remember, there was, I want to say the city had it at something like 35%, and they brought it down to 15 or 20. Benton doesn't have a specific listed area. And then I believe it's Kennewick and Richland were, I could be mixing up the names, but I know the numbers are right, are at 15. So it's pretty comparable to what the other, if not matching. But when compared to others, it's more restrictive because, like I said, they don't even list it.
So when reducing the open space, does it allow for more dwellings to be built?
No, you're limited to the number of, so if you have a 10-acre lot, you can build 10 units. If you get the 15%, if you get the 15% or whatever the minimum requirement is, and the board decides to grant, because it's a may, not shall, grant the 20% difference or increase, then they would have on a 10-acre lot, 12 units. On a 100-acre lot, they would have up to 120 units. So they would get up to 20% extra.
All right,
But that's at the discretion of the board.
all right, thank you.
In that same line of questioning there, Derek, you mentioned before that each one of these dwellings could add 2 AUDs? Is that what they're called?
ADUs, accessory
ADUs.
dwelling units.
Yes.
Yes, assuming the property can accommodate the, again, meet the setback. So any residential right now in Franklin County has a right to up to an 800 square foot attached ADU. Separated or detached ADUs are currently limited to 2 acres or less and require a conditional use permit. Regulations from the state that we're still going through indicate that at least in cities, some of these requirements will no longer be permitted. Some of those apply to counties, some of them don't. We're still weeding through all that, but we will be bringing an ADU regulation to get that cleaned up shortly. We're initiating the Title 17 in October. That's our first workshop with the Planning Commission on that. And then we're going to be bringing that to the board in '24. And we'll be looking at a lot of these clarifying language and getting a little bit more detail in our zones. And this would be one of the chapters that is addressed in that.
So all of the comments are in this packet now?
Correct. You should have on the back one that says comments received after PC packet was sent. It should be at the very back.
Were there any in favor? Because I didn't see any in favor.
From the public?
Yeah.
No, but that's not unusual. We in my career, I'd say that I've received maybe, unless of course it's the applicant or their friends, maybe 3 positive. You almost never hear positive comments. It's only folks that are against the project. Because if you like it, well, you don't care if it moves forward. If you're neutral, same thing. It's only if you have a concern with it that you're generally going to comment.
And by not granting this open space reduction, we're not limiting the houses that are going to be built on these plots of land. That same number is going to be built regardless if we grant the open space reduction or not, correct?
Can't really speak to that. It will affect the decision maker by the developers as to whether or not they want to pull a trigger or what type of trigger they want to pull.
That's all I got.
So this is I think, a more complex proposal than it appears on the surface. On the one hand, and trying to be fair about this and look at it from both sides, on the one hand, if you're able to increase densities in a PUD, you, in theory, might be able to marginally reduce the amount of ag land consumed for housing. But at the same time, by doing that, you're encouraging the development of ag land for housing. I think, it's just my opinion here. Promoting urban infill in the city limits and in donut holes clearly have the interest in the push from the state. And to the extent that the people who own those lands are interested in that infill, I prefer to see it happening there. But again, just an opinion. But I am conscious of the fact that if you make it easier to obtain higher densities out in rural areas where land costs may be different than they are in urbanized areas, you're unintentionally perhaps undercutting any effort or pressure to infill areas in donut holes and inside the urban areas of the city. Just not taking a position whether that's necessarily good or bad, but just pointing out that, you know, every action has some sort of a reaction. Newton said it was equal and opposite. In this case, I don't think it is. There is potential to increase density in the rural areas, which is really inconsistent with the GMA, or at least the intent of the GMA. And the GMA's whole purpose is to maximize your density in your urban areas and minimize the consumption of ag lands for residential uses when you have available more urban areas for residential. So I'm also reminded that the county got out of the parks business years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago now. And we've not done much, if anything, to even discuss the issue of maintaining any kind of public access in the rural areas, whether it's river shore access to the Corps of Engineers shoreline. I know there are some minor ones. I know that some of the developments just north of Burns Road there was an existing 20-foot just off of Rickey Road. Perhaps there's others I'm not aware of, but I'm bringing it up because I think it's something that the county really has an obligation to spend some time looking at, since we've gotten ourselves out of the business of public parks and public access and public open areas. And when I see planned unit developments going to higher densities with reduced open areas, and when those open areas are essentially restricted to the ownership of that planned unit development, to my knowledge, they're not open to the public necessarily.
Correct.
Right. And so I take all of that and then I add to it that, let's see if I can find the right one here. Give me just a moment. This is item B on attachment A, right-of-way requirements. County policy with regards to the dedication of right-of-way and right-of-way improvements may be waived in a PUD. And we've had this discussion, same time we discussed traffic impacts along Burns Road and the walls that have been put up containing those developments. You'll see that some of those are marginally maintained, some are not maintained at all. So that's an additional concern about planned unit developments. If those kinds of responsibilities can be waived at the same time we're granting smaller open areas and higher density, there seems to be an imbalance there between the interests of the public and the interests of the development. So I appreciate all the work that you've done on this. I know it has been a fairly heavy lift. I think there's still a lot of questions.
I may be able to help address a couple of the things you brought up.
Yeah, you know what, I'll just stop right there and educate me, please.
Okay, so you brought up a concern about expanding density allowances in the rural areas through this process that would potentially increase. The zoning, so like, let's say, okay, the primary purpose for AP 20 is agriculture with residential secondary. No subdivisions, clearly states that, in the zone. Well, then a PUD wouldn't be applicable in that, or appropriate in that zone. Staff would most likely recommend denial. However, in the shorelines, where we've adopted a comp plan designation with the idea that it would develop into residential development along through there, and basically it goes, you know, that entire Lammerd of the shoreline development area is intended for residential development. That's where a PUD would be potentially appropriate. Then you run into the next caveat with, if you're going to build a PUD and you're going to reduce the lot sizes beyond to less than the acre, which would be appropriate in that area, well, you got to get them water. Well, you can't get them water from individual wells. You have to either be connected to the city system. So yes, there's
Or a Plan B water system as proposed.
and that's it. That, you know, and then that's a decision between the state and that individual. We've got a water system coming that has gone to the Planning Commission this month. It went. So those, but there's, you know, so there are some, I guess what I'm trying to articulate, there are some bookends, there are some stops, there are some things that keep this from becoming a slippery slope and just like all of a sudden everywhere development occurs. So, I don't know if that addressed.
Yeah, well, let me just simplify the question for both our sakes. Would approval of planned unit developments ever allow housing densities greater than what are currently allowed in any zone, whether it's a Lammerd, whether it's an Ag AP 20, you know?
If you were doing something along the only way I could see it, just because of the fact of the way the infrastructure eats up land and stuff like that, not for a public purpose necessarily, but just it drops your count, your individual unit count. I can't say never, because never is a strong word, but rarely. And it would be done basically, remember, these things are not permitted by right. Okay, so a standard subdivision, you meet the requirements, kind of got to let them go for it, you know, because they meet the rules. It's prescriptive. Planned unit developments are specifically not prescriptive to that degree because they are for the purpose of, hey, this is the novel concept, and they're trying to allow for those concepts to be played out, and or various other elements depending on the jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions have very prescriptive lists, and frankly, I would be looking to do that in the next update to get a little bit more detailed in it. But so I can't say never, but it would be rare or unlikely that they would ever exceed, depending, unless it's something like where they're doing high-rise apartments or something weird like that.
But we could reduce the open space requirement that we currently have without adopting planned unit developments, correct?
That's right.
So, but the reason I say that or ask that is because the current open space requirement we have, whether it's a little bigger or a little smaller than other nearby counties, to me is not so much the issue, because we have the flexibility. If we want to reduce that percentage of open space, we can do that without the other considerations. I was looking for a neutral word. The other considerations that come with planned unit developments. If you reduce the percentage of open space and you make the reasonable assumption that for a given number of units, you're going to have a roughly given amount of open space for streets, setbacks, and so forth. But if you take that from 30% down to 10 or 15%, you're going to have more buildable lots. And so you are going to
More
increase
area.
density.
You're going to have more area. The number of lots is still limited to what's permitted in that zone, regardless of the size of the lots.
Right.
You're limited to that number plus
But
up
if you're
to
not-
20%.
But if you're not constrained, let's say you've got a smaller acreage-wise, smaller PUD, and you don't rise to that lot density, you have the potential to have more lots. You're not constrained by the total in that zone. You're saying,
Up to 20%, correct.
right, okay.
It is theoretically possible, yes.
Well, I would submit that maybe it's more than theoretical. I think it's one of the primary drivers and intents of PUDs.
I don't.
I think.
I don't disagree
Okay.
as to what the potential
Okay.
intents are, but what I'm saying is the realities of the development is, yes, you will get more than, say, the guy that's not doing a PUD, but whether or not you're going to get much more than what would be allowed under code.
I think it depends on the
It's
size of the
question-
project, whether you're talking a
and-
5 acre, a 10 acre, a 100
And
acre.
design
The math
and
is
what
different.
style you're building. Are you doing cottage style or are you doing zero lot line? Zero lot line is going to give you more units. Anything with a space, you start losing those unit counts with setbacks.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to continue to listen, but I'm inclined to think that a better path for the county might be to look at reducing the percentage of open space requirement as opposed to adopting PUDs, but going to continue to think about it. The PUDs versus what we currently use, right?
Right, there is no requirement. PUDs, we already have in code. It's just that what we're looking at here is a differential of 35% to 15%.
And the 35% is embodied where?
In the code,
Right.
yeah, so I guess I'm not tracking on that last statement you made.
Well, if the code changed from 35 to 25,
Uh-huh,
would that allow for somewhat higher density, but not as high as PUDs? And I realize that the density is driven by the zoning, but we've already acknowledged that based on the size of the project, that reality changes.
but the only section that requires an open space set aside is through the PUD. None of the other zones or subdivision processes require open space. They do require us to look at the access to the river.
And they require some setbacks that are waivable under the PUD, so which effectively increases it as well. Unless,
I guess,
maybe I'm reading it wrong, but this does say
Am I
that,
hearing that you mean that maybe what we should do is just under all zones require a minimum open space requirement? That's
no.
what I interpreted.
What I'm
you
getting
said.
to is
Okay.
under a PUD, you do have an open space requirement, but you're also opening the door to waive setback requirements.
Yes.
Right. And so when you reduce setbacks and you've got the other necessary utilities, say a Group B water system approved by ecology, you can increase density
Up to,
up to, well, you can, the
20%.
state standard, we talk about an acre for a septic system, but I think the state standard is actually a half acre. And if you've got land that perks well, conceivably, you wouldn't have to have an acre per unit. You could go to something smaller, half or 5/8, whatever. If you've got the water system, right, because of the density of septic systems, you
Yes.
can't have water wells circled in amongst all those septics. So if you've got a Group B water system and you do a planned unit development and you don't have setbacks, you can create a higher density than you currently can. That's my read.
Okay, I see. When you're saying density, you're saying the actual proximity of units to one another. I was thinking
I'm talking-
unit count density. I apologize.
Well,
So,
but, yeah.
yeah, I mean, well, I see what I think I see what you're saying, that you
I don't think the concerns expressed about PUDs are predicated on how many units in a 100-acre parcel. They've all been focused on the amount of open space and clear space and the appearance and the density that it provides. That's where the concerns that I've heard expressed generally tend to focus.
Yep, I track on what you're saying now, and I can see where that is a concern. Basically, instead of being scattered out, it's clustered into one area, and it's like a lump or something
And the
like
open
that.
space around it's 15%. Or
Again,
more
I
if they want to add more,
Well,
they
see,
can.
that's what-
Kind of runs
I can-
counter to the whole PUD process.
I can see where these things are possibilities, but also at the same time, just with my experience with how development occurs, there are things that occur, and I can't rule them out.
Yeah.
But there are things that are more likely, and
It's
that's,
been
I
my
guess, where I'm
experience
at.
that professional developers are pretty skilled at maximizing.
They are. They're gonna maximize their unit count.
And I don't fault them for that in the least. Let's be
Yeah,
clear.
I mean, that's.
Yeah.
So, yes, a PUD could, depending on, again, all of these, and that's why we have different methodologies for folks to submit to subdivide or develop their land, because different dynamics, binding site plans for commercial and industrial is a similar scenario where once you get that set up, you can start, as long as you don't violate the number of lots, but it's a different application, and it only, you don't use that for residential, it's for commercial and industrial. So it's another arrow in a developer's quiver.
In the interest of fairness, one final question. If you've got 100 acres that you want to develop, or let's make it, 100's fine. The number of units, assuming that you can get water, right? Say you've got a Group B water system approved by the Department of Ecology. On that 100 acres, does a planned unit development give you any opportunity to produce more dwelling units than the current process that we're using without PUDs?
For a standard zone, yes. However, we already have adopted a PUD, so we already have the PUD process. It's just a matter of them doing 35% as opposed to 15.
And if you go from a 35% to a 15% on that same 100 acres, does that offer the opportunity, if a developer wished, to build more units?
Yes.
Does that, given that the land size hasn't gotten bigger, increase density?
It could.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any other questions, comments? If not, I'd open up to the public right now to come forward and speak on this.
Good morning, Commissioners. Peter Harpster, Octera Engineering, 2815 St. Andrews Loop, Pasco, here today representing the applicant once again. I'll go through my notes and then address some of the questions and comments that were raised. The facts of the matter before you this morning are that there's 8 goals and policies of the Franklin County Comprehensive Plan that this amendment is in accordance with. Number 1, the amendment is supported by county-wide planning policies concerning open space and recreation in that it encourages the retention and dedication of open space to enhance recreational opportunities. Number 2, the amendment supports the intent of the comp plan land use element goal number 3 by encouraging the maintenance, preservation, and conservation of open space lands. Number 3, the amendment supports the intent of comp plan land use element goal number 6 by encouraging the development of neighborhoods that support a high quality of life. Number 4, the amendment supports the intent of comp plan rural lands element goal number 1 by maintaining the rural character of the county. Number 5, the amendment will promote the development of master plan resorts, which is a goal of the county as contained in goal number 3 of the comprehensive plan rural lands element. Number 6, the amendment will promote the utilization of wetland, natural hazard areas, and wildlife areas as open space, which is goal number 6 of the comprehensive plan capital facilities plan element. Number 7, the amendment will promote the protection, conservation, and restoration of natural areas, shorelines, and critical areas in accordance with goal number 1 of the comprehensive plan natural environment element. And then number 8, the amendment will help to manage, conserve, and protect the county's natural resources through a balance of development activities complemented with sound environmental practices, which is in accordance with goal number 6 of the comprehensive plan transportation and circulation element. The effect of this proposal, as found in the staff report, it will not be material detrimental to the county. Requiring 15% of the land to be set aside for open space still achieves the intent of Franklin County Code 1758, which is to provide landowners with flexibility and creativity should they choose to bring forward a land use application. The question was brought up what other jurisdictions do by Commissioner Mullen. In relation to that, every jurisdiction in Eastern Washington is below 35% except for one. And about half of them don't even have a requirement. And so, as Mr. Bratton said, we're at the very top of that, which is why we see no planned unit developments in Franklin County. Most of the public comments received are in relation to project-specific concerns. This application before you today is simply a request to amend the code. Project-specific concerns will have the opportunity to be heard at potential public hearings in the future should any landowners decide to bring forward a land use application. Any impacts realized at that time, things we've talked about today, such as traffic, will have to be mitigated in accordance with Franklin County Code. A few more comments that were submitted. Don't want to change zoning in the county. And so again, I just want to mention this is not a change to the zoning map. It's an application to change for a code amendment. Other comments reference the notion that there would be small homes as a result of this application. And again, those are project-specific concerns. Any future land use applications brought forward by a landowner would have to conform to minimum lot standards, dwelling unit sizes, and other requirements as set forth by Franklin County Code. One comment, and it was brought up today, references a 20% density bonus that's contained within Franklin County Code. We're not seeking to amend that portion of the code. Density bonuses applied for by any landowners would be reviewed by staff at the time that a project application is brought forward. That already exists in the code today. We're not looking to amend that. And if a landowner decided to submit a land use application, then the code states that that process, specifically for a PUD and a potential 20% density bonus, is a negotiation back and forth with staff that's brought before the Planning Commission and brought before the board. One comment, again, this was brought up this morning, contains the notion that a 100-acre development could have 100 dwelling units, but doesn't take into account the fact that at least 25% of the land would be dedicated as right-of-ways, streets, other infrastructure, and another 15%, if this was passed, would be dedicated as open space. Again, it's worth noting, but those are project-specific concerns that would be brought up when a land use application was submitted by a landowner. A lot of what-ifs today and hypotheticals and theoreticals and questions about what if this or that, and all of those are great. All of those would be considered when an application is submitted by a landowner. Staff would review those subsequent applications with an applicant at that time. Today's simply just a code amendment. Our ask today would be that the board would vote yes on the proposed amendment, taking into consideration staff's recommendation for approval. As Commissioner Peck mentioned, Mr. Bratton and his staff are very experienced. The Planning Commission also forwarded a recommendation of approval, and most of those planning commissioners have been on that board for over a decade. With regards to ADUs, a future and again, we're getting into theoreticals that deal with project-specific actions, which this is not, but I do want to still address it. ADUs could be prohibited by a future HOA that would be formed as part of a future potential development. So to kind of just rein everything back in that we've talked about for the last hour, all these concerns mentioned today would be addressed with future land use applications. Today's simply a code amendment to go from 35% to 15%. Design standards aren't under review today, and other changes regarding those would need to be brought up through another text amendment that the board could initiate, or that the public could initiate, or that the planning commission could initiate, according to Franklin County Code. Not granting this application today will impact developers. So as we talked about, they'd be forced to keep lots smaller to account for the added open space. With this change, as you saw in the exhibit a month ago, those lots can be spread out, which is more consistent with the development that we see in Franklin County. The potential to increase density, again, already exists. This change doesn't affect the density. And then any parks that could potentially happen with a PUD if a landowner wanted to have parks, or if they want to have walking trails, anything like that would be owned and maintained by the HOA that was created as a part of that planning and development. Again, if a landowner brought forward a land use application. This application really is pretty simple, and it's just 35% to 15%. That's in line with counties that are similar to our population size, such as Spokane County and other neighboring jurisdictions. Pasco's 15%. And like I said, there's a lot of other counties and cities on this side of the state that don't even have a requirement at all. And so with that, happy to answer any questions as they come up.
Mr. Bratton.
Yeah, regarding the ADUs and the HOAs, I don't disagree with what Mr. Harpster said, but I also don't know that that will be maintained by the state. The reason, and I'd have to double check, for example, solar panels were often forbidden by HOAs. Lots of legislations now come down to where they can't prohibit solar panels. Even though it's in their bylaws and stuff, the state can come back and change that. So at this current time, CCNRs, I do believe, would potentially protect against that. However, with the push that's going on, it's also just, I would say it's 50-50 as to whether the state would override that. So.
Is there anybody else for public comment?
Robert Carasino, 130 Terrace Drive, Franklin County, Washington. I spoke to you at the August 23rd meeting, and I want to incorporate by reference all the comments that I made at that time, as well as the comments that I submitted. But the main factor I want you to understand is that the practical effect of what you're doing is to allow developers to increase the density by the 20% that may already be within the current PUD regulations, but currently the 35% open space requirement acts as a counterbalance. In order to get that 20% more units, you have to have that much open space. What they're proposing is reduce the open space to almost nothing, so I can put a bike path or a walking path in front of the lots that I put into a PUD, and now I get to build 120 units on 100 acres. And we just heard Mr. Harpster say that under the standard 1 acre zoning requirements, you can't get more than 75 in. So instead of 75 units, we're going to go up to 120. Now, I realize that it's got to get approval from the planning department, but if you change the statutes upon which the planning department has to operate and the developers certainly will operate, what's going to be the basis to say, no, you've got to have a better basis than just saying, oh, gee, I didn't realize suddenly we're going to have a 40, 50% increase in the number of houses that will be built, the number of roads, there'll be roadways impact from all those residents who are driving cars on the minimal county roadways that we already have, the increased number of domestic water users that we're going to have that are taking water out of our existing water systems. That's not, you've got to have some other basis. Once you change the rules, you've given the developers the way to go free. And I don't know who Mr. Peter Harpster is. There's another name of Peter Harpster that was associated with proposals made by Actera to rezone or get approval of subdivisions at the Kohler Upper Vineyards area and out at the Underwood property, in which case that Peter Harpster made the assertion that half-acre lots were allowed by the current requirements of the planning for a comprehensive plan for Franklin County. And that request for that half-acre lot size was only withdrawn after public comment said, this is crazy, this is not what the comprehensive plan requires. And Derek Bratton and the planning department said the same thing. So they pulled at the last minute those subdivision approval applications. And so I have to say, I can't take with believing there's a lot of accuracy to the statements that he makes when he says, this really won't happen. We're going to do all these other things. I don't understand how a reduction in open space from 35% to 15% somehow enhances the county goals of maintaining open space. Certainly, I don't see how it in any way is consistent with the requirement of the comprehensive plan for the number one goal of Franklin County, to maintain the rural environment of the county. This is giving developers a way to get around the standard zoning requirements. In practice, and it's a lot more than a 20% increase, which some people have talked about, because again, Mr. Harpster has given us the information. It's 75 lots on 100 acres that has to have roadways put into it first, and then, before you can take the 100 acres and sell the lots, you get around 75 lots, he says. But the PUD regulations let you put in 120 lots. So think of where you live. If you've got any kind of residential development requirements, why wouldn't a developer who intends to just maximize profit propose a PUD? Now, fortunately, we have some very upstanding developers in the county who continue to show us it is possible to develop property with 1 acre lot sizes and make money on it. And I would reference the current notice of pending subdivision land use approval by Randy Mullen for the plateau at River Reach. He is proposing to put in a subdivision that will have 26 lots on 34 acres. And in reading the narrative that was submitted by him, actually by Actera, it touts as why this is a good idea. It's because it meets the number one goal of the Franklin County Comprehensive Plan in maintaining the rural character, because all lots will be 1 acre or more, and the average will be 1.14 acres. So it's financially possible. We don't need to do this. We don't need to destroy the rural character of the county. We don't need to take away the counterbalance that is in the current PUD statutes that cause a developer to make a bona fide kind of decision to do something new, as opposed to try and figure out a workaround when their other workarounds haven't qualified to put more lots in the rural parts of the county. We've already given up 4,000 acres of farmland that was included in the Franklin County Comprehensive Plan and Pasco urban growth boundary in the last go-around just a couple of years ago. Pasco has already annexed almost all of that land. All of those thousands of acres are available for developers to make a planned unit development and use the Pasco rules if they want to. They don't need to come out into the rural part of the county where people have bought lots and built houses on the expectation that they're going to be in an area that stays rural, 1 acre size lots or more, or if there's a PUD that has a very large amount of open space in it, 35% minimum. It just doesn't make sense, and I have not talked to one resident of Franklin County other than an owner of property that would like to develop it, or a developer who is in favor of this. They've all told me, please go to the Franklin County commissioners and again reiterate this. And in fact, several people have come today to indicate that they agree with this position. Frankly, I think it's interesting that it's Franklin County and its neighbor Grant County, two of the major farming communities, that have the 35% rule in their PUD requirements. So it's not like we're out there alone. We are doing what is appropriate to maintain the rural character of Franklin County. And people know this. They don't come to meetings with you because their lives are so busy. I got so many responses when we talked about this. Gee, I'd like to come, but I've got to be down in Walla Walla. I've got to go to my job. I can't attend. So they're counting on us to do the right things. And you and I, we're all, I'm older than all of you, I'll admit that. But we're in that same kind of general category where in a few years we're going to have to look back and see what we have done to this county. What's our legacy? Do we want to maintain the rural character, or do we want to say, to heck with it? We'll just let things go. You know, we'll say this is not a big change because there's some PUD regulation already in place. We're just changing 35% to 15%, and that's a nothing. 20% less open space is a nothing. So I would really encourage you to make the right decision for the citizens of Franklin County, not for the developers of Franklin County. And please vote down this change to the open space requirements in the PUD statutes.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to comment? If so, please come forward.
I'm Marty Conger, 160 McDonald Drive. To me, this is very simple. It is maintaining the rural nature of our locale and North Franklin, and it's why I came here. I've lived at that locale for 38 years, and I'm not opposed to development. I just like to see it keep the same nature as it was promised when I first built out there. The other thing I'd like to note, and I think Bob has stated all the facts very accurately, and I'm in full agreement, is that water demands out in our area are going to be getting very tenuous. I've had a well for 38 years. My well was set at, my well pump was set at 183 feet. It started to cavitate. I had to lower it 35 feet. So I'm just pointing out that as the development goes on here, it's probably going to have significant impacts to water usage and water table in our area. And I know that the state of ecology is looking at different things, but I can almost predict right now, and I'm seeing it from some of our other neighbors, that this is going to become a more acute problem as and especially if we add a lot of density out there beyond the 1 acre. So I also urge that the Commission does not support this change. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
My name is Cynthia Muse. I live at 260 Ridgeview Drive in Pasco. I'm a 65-plus year resident of Franklin County, a Basin original. Also went to college in Montana, where there's big sky and open space. I'm also the same age as Bob. So we have an obligation and a duty to think about the future generations and what kind of legacy that we're going to leave for them. And I know on TV right now, the big thing is, CBS taking on the Yellowstone, Montana ranch, Dutton family odyssey of this fiction of the Wild West and rural living. But I guess I bring that up because one of the things that's happening here is it's telling us that the public is craving for rural development and rural, they want to vicariously live that rural lifestyle by watching these kinds of programs. And we're living it. The urban people are watching this and wishing for it. We've got kids that are lost in cyberspace. We've got kids that can't tell reality from fantasy or fiction anymore because of artificial intelligence. And what they need is open space in rural areas to be connected with, to bring themselves back to reality again. And we can provide that if we make the right decisions. And, the Duttons, I think, are right on, and I want to speak for John Dutton here, and knowing what he would probably say, and I know that also John Mullen was one of the finest, most honorable cowboys in this county, and I would be presumptuous to speak for him in saying that he probably too likes the rural complexity of what we have in Franklin County and the way to keep it, even if it's just at 1 acre. So please consider what impact we are having on the future, because it's critically important that we do this right. We don't get a second chance. So thank you very much for doing the right thing.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? I'm seeing nobody else coming to the mic. Is there any other comments by the commissioners?
I have a question. By reducing the open space, does that allow for bigger lots for the houses that go in those developments?
It could.
Which would be more conducive to, if you had a riverfront lot, you would own more property with the same amount of houses.
Right there. Remember that.
Right, I do. And that's why I bring up the comment. I mean, if you have a riverfront lot, rather than putting in let's say a park that no one wants to maintain, because that seems to be the issue, as far as if you're a development and you're required to put in, let's say, a park, who's going to maintain it? It almost seems more advantageous to me to put a bigger lot, and the property owner would maintain his own property.
That would not be considered open space.
Would not be.
From what I'm understanding, you're saying basically accommodate that open space requirement through larger lot sizes?
No, it would allow the property owner to own a larger lot, as opposed to, if you can only put 10 houses on 10 acres,
Yes.
then your lot size at your personal residence could be larger
With the 15%.
with the
correct.
15%,
Yes.
which seems more conducive to riverfront homes, in my opinion.
Again, it's all going to come down to how they want to lay out and the specifics of the property, but yes, that is possible. It's a potentiality.
So Derek, by the by the same logic, if you had a 100-acre development and you wanted to put 2 homes on it, call it a PUD, you could do that, and you'd have 2 50-acre lots, and it'd give you lots of open space. The point I'm getting to is that the notion of a PUD is that it constrains how many you can fit on there. But there's nothing in the current rules or the PUD rules that would keep you from having larger lots if that was your goal.
We do.
But the whole nature of PUDs in a reduced open space is not to make larger lots. You can already make as large a lot as you want.
That's true, but if you were only going to have 10 lots on the same amount of property, with the reduction of the open space would allow each of those same 10 lots to be larger in size. Is that correct?
Yes, you guys are having a pencil out discussion.
I just.
What I'm hearing from Commissioner Mullen is, in his thing, he's looking at maximum utilization of the property, and that would be the case. Yes, if you were going for your maximum density by having a 15% open space requirement, you could, in theory, create potentially larger lots.
Yes.
To Commissioner Peck's point, from what I'm understanding, is that, well, you can already have larger lots, but you're not going to be maximizing your potential value of the property. But you can, as a developer, choose to do whatever you want, because we don't have what a lot of jurisdictions do, which are zoning minimums. For example, in the city of Pasco and a lot of other jurisdictions, if you've got, say, light or low density, then you have this range. It shall be no less than 2 units per acre and no more than, say, 5 units. And then high density, you're looking at, 7 to 10. You shall, at a minimum, put in 7 units. You don't have the option of 2 50-acre lots. We don't have those. Those are things we will be looking at introducing, just to give, again, more clarity as to potentialities. But at this current time, your description applies to a maximized application of the regulations. Yeah, trying to maximize my density, that would apply. But there is no requirement to have a maximum density, we only have minimums. We have no limitation on maximum, I guess is the best way of putting that.
It's essentially converting open space to larger yards.
Right. The goal with the open space is it's, if not for the public, it is for the enjoyment of the residents. So I don't need to ask you whether or not I can go into that open space, but if it's attached to the yard or something like that, then I do, and it's not considered as part of that. But it doesn't change the fact that, yeah, you got more area, you can, fit more area between each unit, like I had in that slide. That was a very basic layout, though.
So with the bonus, does the PUD allow you to get more units on a given piece of ground?
See, and that's the counter. It may be the
Right.
fact that now that I can do 12 units, though I could under 10 get a larger yard, the additional 2 units are going to make it so that now everybody's got the same as they would under 35. Again, because of this, it's all project specific, as Mr. Harpster noted, that a lot of these things are project specific, and they would come up during the actual review of the proposal at that time. That said, in that scenario, you're doing 12, depending on the limitations of the property. It may make it if you go for that total 12, but maybe 11 won't. But then you're not truly maximizing your potential value on the property. So each of those dynamics are going to be very site-specific, product-specific, owner-specific, depending on the developer and what they envision. We had a developer that this happened before my time, up in the RC1, that agreed to 2-acre minimums. There's no obligation to do that. And I periodically get people asking me to allow them to subdivide it, or to break those 2 units. But that's the agreement that they entered into when they moved into the area. So we do have examples where developers have not chosen to maximize the valuation or the number of units because they were looking for a specific style or quality of life dynamic or whatever they were doing that they saw that being, Or maybe they were just like, I don't want to fight a big fight. You know, it's hard to say exactly why, but it does happen. It depends on the developer and a lot of variables.
I just wanted to point out the fact that if you did keep your lot size, or the structures, the amount of structures on the property the same, by reducing the open space would create bigger lots.
Good, yes.
And those bigger lots are more conducive to being on the riverfront, because all I'm hearing is the fact that they can put more lots on there. But as a developer that is selling high-end properties, I don't think the goal is to slam as many houses in as they possibly can. I would think that a riverfront lot is going to be more marketable, having a larger lot that opens up more sight to the river.
Again, it's
And
yeah,
again,
maybe.
it's all
The older-
perspective.
The older I get, I find the smaller yard I want.
Right, yeah, that-
But I
that
still
is
might
true.
want to look at the river.
But you don't want to be right next to somebody either. And I think that at least that's been my observation, that trying to keep it open on the river, open views.
That starts getting into, you know, it'll increase or decrease my property values. Well, a lot of that is in the eye of the beholder.
That is
it's
true.
And that's why for me, often when I hear that cry, it's going to lower my property, I ask, show me the evidence, because nobody's been able to actually yet. When I've asked that question.
Sure.
So Derek-
It's a fear factor often, but the reality is it's in the eye of the beholder. What I would accept, you would never accept. I live on 10th Avenue in Kennewick, over by Trios, so it's a lot of traffic going by there and sirens and stuff, but it's okay for me because that's just the dynamic and environment I grew up in. Other people, there's no way they would tolerate it.
So Derek, would this impact all the county rural areas equally with the shoreline plan? Lands that are within the shoreline and those that aren't?
Yeah, it would apply in the areas that are available for subdivision, basically. For example, like our RR or our RC5 zones or the RC1 zones that are out in the blocks, the Lammerts, rural, actually, a lot of those are RR. The point being is those, no, you wouldn't be able to come in and re-subdivide those because they're already at their minimums. The shoreline area is really the county's primary residential development zone. There's some stuff along the fringes, but that's the big zone. And yes, it would apply the entirety of that Lammert, what we call the shoreline development, residential development.
And what percentage of that available shoreline area is waterfront?
I honestly don't know
You don't have
off
to
the top
answer,
of my head,
but I think we can visualize a map.
it's maybe a tenth, I would say would be, and then the rest goes back.
Right.
Yeah.
And-
It's one,
And with or without a PUD, there's
Section
nothing that
line.
stops the developer from making nice big waterfront lots.
nothing would,
That's right.
yeah.
So I'll just say the notion that reducing the open space requirement would allow for those bigger lots, it might for a given acreage, but you're talking about high dollar waterfront lots, large lots.
It also allows for tiered development, I guess you could say.
So I'm looking at the impact of limited number of waterfront lots and the impact on the rest of the zone. Because you can still make as big a waterfront lot as you want. There's just a little bit of economic differential, which I would suggest, as a guy who owns a house in the river, that the values are there are such that they overcome that percentage difference.
Yeah, and another dynamic, I mean, it would not be uncommon to see what I call tiered development, to where like on the shoreline, you've got one style of housing. As you come back up off of it, and then as you move into an area to where, you know, due to the elevation or the shape of the land, you have really small maybe or different, you know, you'll see these common and, again, mixed sizes and stuff like that. I could see it being more dramatic. PUDs would allow for that, whereas under a standard zone, you can't. It's all that minimum size. I mean, you go larger, but you can't flex on the problem.
You could if you had the water, and if you had adequate land for a septic, and you had soils.
Yeah, I mean, we're discussing a lot of hypotheticals that have to do
Sure.
with a whole lot of specifics on the ground that could just blow anything that we're talking about out. You know, if you've got a lot of ridge lines and stuff, that's going to be a completely different dynamic than if you've got flat or heavy slope. All of those dynamics, depending on where you're at on that shoreline, is going to greatly determine. And going to one of the comments, you know, regarding the protection of areas, is it allows for a developer to go, like, there's a ravine, right? And they can just go, we're just not going to touch that. We're going to leave it in open space, as opposed to coming in, basically making that ravine go away. Now, they would have to pay potential impacts and things like that, depending on what happened, but it's all a balancing act.
Sure.
And that's what we have a planning department for.
And a board to help me make these decisions.
So just to be clear, Derek, everywhere the cities has annexed ground, they take jurisdiction over. We do not.
Correct. Once it's become annexed, it is the jurisdictional authority of
And
the
with
city.
larger lot sizes, there's the greater possibility of the coming before the board, the 2 ADUs that it could possibly have. The greater the opportunity for more.
Oh, the larger the lot, the more potentiality, yes.
Yes. So is there any other comments, questions? Seeing nobody else coming forward, I will close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Move for approval of ordinance 07-2023 as presented.
There has been a motion and no second. So the motion fails. With that, we'll move down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment? Please come forward. I won't ask about, please come forward. I won't ask for phones because we don't have nobody manning phones.
Morning, Commissioners and staff. Thomas Granbois, Big Maple Properties, 108 North 4th Avenue in Pasco. Last week, we heard some discussion around the .09 finances that are coming in. It's really exciting to hear that there's that the county and the port and the city, sounds like they're working together on things. As a small business owner and a property owner in the downtown, it's always great to see these large projects potentially being funded or that were discussed last week, but it would be nice to see if there were some opportunities to allocate these funds to help local, small economic development as well. I'm sure that throughout the county that we have older properties and businesses that could use a little help and hand up, and it'd be great if the county could look at that potential. We'd really appreciate that.
All right, thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Seeing nobody coming forward, we'll close public comment. Commissioner Administrative Updates, Mr. Gonzalez.
Good morning, Chair. Continues to be busy. Yesterday, attended a really interesting WASAC budget meeting with county administrators and commissioners from across the state. And certainly it looks like a slowdown in the economy a little bit. Lewis County, Thurston Pacific said they plan to cut some staff this coming budget year, so they're looking at tightening their belts. We've even heard our friends across the river in Benton County are tightening up their belts a little bit, especially on their overtime. So was interesting to hear that from some of our stakeholders. Had a chance to meet with Clark Worth from Consor yesterday and talked a little bit with Tim Anderson just about the financial study that we have going on. Tim thought, this year, pretty consistent. We're in a pretty good position, probably end up with $6 million fund balance. Sales tax has been kind of a bright spot, is what Clark Worth is telling us. It should remain strong. One of the takeaways from their study so far, Franklin County, we're spending less money than we typically do, but just like everybody else, we're being squeezed between revenue, expenditures, inflations, hitting us hard. And as you guys know, it's just really difficult for us to generate revenue as a county. We just don't get that sales tax that we typically get if you're a city jurisdiction. Salary study is progressing. Just wanted to give you a small snapshot on that. We just finished up the sheriff support staff and also the jail maintenance staff. Now moving on to the PA's office, OPD, the clerk, and district court. So Consor is busy with that, and Carrie Locke, who is working with them and contacting jurisdictions. So we've been meeting with her quite often just to keep that updated, and then going to subsequently work with Tony Menke, who advises us on CBA issues. Benefits committee meeting yesterday, so we'll have to make a decision on benefits soon, but the hub has been working pretty hard on our behalf, and it looks like we've got some pretty good numbers back in terms of some of the companies that want to bid on Franklin County. So I think I'm crossing my fingers we'll have better insurance than we currently have. So that's coming to fruition. Some news that came out today, because since we're talking about the economy, the Federal Reserve left the main U.S. interest rate the same. It's about 5.25 to 5.50. So that's good news. That doesn't further slow it down. So job market is strong, wages are higher, and I'm kind of dovetailing off the salary study because there is that desire by employees to get paid a little bit more. So I've been working on the Harris White leisure contract. They were in town meeting with stakeholders. They had a chance to meet with SVM, and those meetings went really well. So they're excited to work with SVM on catering. The current contracts that are in place with catering will stay with SVM. And, as I've said before, SVM is going to be a big part of the catering future. So those talks continue. We'll have a full contract for the board on the 27th that you guys will approve, hopefully, and I'll get that to your inboxes. Probably on my Sunday report. Some of the things we're negotiating are just the management fee right now. Also working on a salary, not a salary, but more like an accounting transition plan with CLA accounting and also our auditor's office, and just to really give HWL a good playing field so they can really hit benchmarks. I think the biggest difference I see in this contract is what HWL is going to try to do is hit some incentive marks and hopefully get a ton of sales and concerts and things like that generate revenue. So if you incentivize the contract, that obviously gives them the incentive to work harder. So looking forward to that coming to fruition. Other things that have been going on, the Wasatch lawsuit, a lot of media attention on that in terms of the support for OPD, and that's been out there quite a bit. So also met with department heads and elected officials. So continue to keep busy. We've got a lot of things as we come into budget season, so looking forward to that process.
Thank you. Commissioner Peck?
Took a few days off last week for some personal out-of-state business. It's good to be back. Tomorrow I'll be up in Ellensburg for the Washington State Association of Counties Legislative Steering Committee, where we'll be working to finalize the legislative agenda for the 2024 legislative session in Olympia. Columbia Basin Development League Board of Trustees meeting this week as well. wanted to check in with the county administrator. We received an email from SVM representatives expressing concern that the amount of compensation that they received last year from the county was misreported. And I wanted to know if county administrator saw that email, and if it was misreported, this would be a great opportunity to address that, if it was.
I don't think it was misreported. I was told by the auditor's office a number. I don't know. Matt Beaton said he would be here to address that, so kind of want to leave that in their hands.
Do you
saw him in
recall
here
what
earlier.
you reported?
I saw him in here earlier, but he's not in here currently.
Yeah, I believe if memory serves, was it 18.5 was reported, and from the email received, 12.5 was the correct number? Is that square with what we understand?
I'll have to get you that information from the auditor's office.
Okay. Do you remember what you reported last week?
I'd have to go back and look.
You don't remember?
I'd have to go back and look to clear my memory.
Okay, thanks.
Why, Commissioner Mullen, there he is. Yes, you have been sequestered.
Go ahead, what do you want to know? So my question was, I wasn't here last week, as I already mentioned, and my understanding is that a number for compensation paid to SVM for managing the HAPO Center was reported in last week's meeting. I wasn't here, but I did see a subsequent email from Mr. Simmons with SVM expressing concern about the number that was reported, and I'm simply trying to get the facts of the matter. What was reported last week, and what did we actually pay them, and is there any difference?
No, I mean, it's 12.5 is what goes. Everybody knows that. That's what we're paying them per month. What this has all come out of is this discussion and the assertions through this process that there's some notion of profitability and discussions around the finances. And what it really comes down to is the treatment of expenses for the HAPO Center and where they're at. So, when we, right now, the profit that goes to SVM is not on from the SVM side. My understanding is it's not put into the HAPO numbers, and that's one of the reasons we're bringing CLA in, because they're Clifton Larson Allen, the accounting firm, in, is because they will take all the numbers, the expenses, revenues, all of it, and they'll present them back to the county, to us, in a manner that's an acceptable accounting standard. So the fact is, yes, it's always been the same amount, but there was questions asked during the contract negotiation process to find out what is the actual operational cost. And the expenses for the contract, the 12.5, was never in like the profit and loss. It was held separately, and so it was represented differently than what might be a usual accounting standard. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing, is because SVM had, based on coming into the situation the way they did, they set things up in a manner and operated it, and now we're just trying to bring in CLA to present those in a manner that's consistent with accrual accounting and typical accounting standards. So that might have been what the confusion was around. We've had some exchanges, and I know the last report I had was that Clifton Larson Allen is, they're working well together, and I understand that their SVM's working well with CLA to get them the information, as well as with the other firm, HWL. So.
Okay. Well, I'd like to pretend that I followed all that, but I didn't. We did have a contract with SVM to pay them $12,500 per month, and SVM sent us an email on Thursday that said that that's exactly what they got paid, not a dime more. That's quoting.
Sure.
So if there's something in the calculation that gives the appearance that SVM was paid more than that, then certainly that is worth everybody's time to address. I'm told that the report in last week's meeting was more on the order of $18,500 a month paid to SVM, when in fact it was $12,500. So I think we've cleared that up. I appreciate the help in getting through that.
We did clear it up or not? You said you misunderstood. Would you like
Well, I didn't understand the way that you cast it, but it is pretty clear from the video that the number that was reported last week was more than 12.5. And we've got an email from SVM saying they received exactly 12.5 a month, not a dime more. And trusting the video and trusting SVM, I think I'm satisfied, but
Well, and I think the important thing is that SVM, you're talking about SVM's profit. You're not talking about the money that's going to SVM to operate the facility. That's a much bigger number because the contract, they pass through employment costs.
actually I'm talking about the money that they receive and are allowed to keep as their own.
Sure.
As opposed to operational funds that flow in, but then get used to pay expenses for HAPO.
Right.
So I'm really looking at what do they actually receive? And sounds like the whole accounting process could probably be cleaned up, so I'm glad you've got CLA involved.
Right. I mean, that's why we were concerned, is that during that transition, when we brought in the interim, the fact that the money isn't all kept in the HAPO books was a concern. And that's why even during this process, the assertion of profitability was a concern for people looking at the financial statements. And so it didn't seem like anybody could agree on, a standard on what a profit is. We can in the accounting department, but to look at someone and have a discussion like this even is, it shouldn't even be happening, because if everything flowed into HAPO by the operator and then was portioned out, and it would be clear what the expenses were and what the operational costs of the facility were. Yeah. So, and I think that's right now, as Harris White Leisure comes in, they're saying, look, it isn't just 12.5. You're actually paying, are we going to bring employees? Or are we not going to bring employees? Are you going to pay them? Is it going to be passed through? And from a control accounting standpoint, we're trying to get there to set this up properly. So it'll be a lot clearer in the future than it has been since January. So that's the goal.
I think you make a good point there at the end about the employees, which ones are paid for by the contractor and which ones are paid for by the county, and it'll be good to see that clarified better.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to get to.
I think from the email that Simmons sent, there's actually two accounts. One is the payments that go to SVM for their services, 12.5 a month. Everything else is in the other account. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be for him to tell us how he's treating that. The challenge that we have trying to read the financials is, my question is, why is that separated? The check should flow into the entity, and then the entity cost should flow out of the entity. And what happened was, when we put the contract was, we got to where we're at. Now we need to clear all these things up, and a lot of these kind of back and forth over, is it profitable, isn't it profitable? If everything was set up to a standard and done, properly the first time around, and it wasn't such a rush deal, we would have been able to, we wouldn't be having these discussions now. And that's what I'm hopeful with HWL. So we'll get there. And so we're working on it every day. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Chair, permission to speak?
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to put this on the record because, reading in between the lines of the email, I don't want Steve Simmons to think I was trying to intentionally make him look bad. I truly appreciate the efforts that they've done. They did an excellent job. And the fact of the matter is they're going to be a big part of the process. So, in terms of catering, but certainly it's gotten emotional in the community, and I've always said we need to separate the decision to hire HWL and how we feel about the Simmons and their work and CG. Not one person I've talked with, and I feel the same, that they're good people. We're not here to make them look bad. They're going to be a big and excellent part of the HAPO Center, but we needed to hire a company that could run effectively a 100,000 square foot center. They're going to be a great addition to the catering elements out there. So, if I offended the Simmons family, I apologize. It was not my intent. I'm going to continue to work with them, and they're excellent caterers and a big part of the community. So just wanted to put that on the record out there in the community. They're still a part of the Franklin County family.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Commissioner Mullen?
I'd just like quickly say thank you for those comments. I think they're appropriate. I wasn't aware that they'd been hired to be the caterers. Is that true?
Well, not full-time yet, but they're gonna execute all contracts that are in place. So, you know, there was that opportunity. I mean, HWL could have theoretically said, hey, you've got these catering gigs, you know, we're gonna use somebody else, is my understanding. But they had great conversation and talks went really well on this past Thursday. And HWL said, hey, yeah, continue with catering. So again, they're going to be a big part of that process.
So, doesn't sound like they've been hired.
Well, let's quit speculating on this.
Yeah,
Wait till the 27th for the contract. Let's wait for the 27th.
You make a good point.
We're speculating here. We don't know what's in the contracts. Let's just wait to the 27th.
We in fact don't know that they'll be a big part.
Let's
But we
let
hope.
Commissioner Mullen give his updates, please.
All right. So I attended the elected department head meeting last week, also the benefits committee meeting that Mr. Gonzalez commented on, working on trying to find the right provider for benefits. Had the Ben Franklin Transit meeting last week, and just want to say a big thank you to our local law enforcement for their outstanding work and great response times in working with the transit. Safety is very important, and our local law enforcement has always been there and do a great job in supporting the transit. Monday had the WASAC meeting, and then later today we have the Board of Health meeting, and also visit Tri-Cities next Wednesday morning, which overlaps with the commissioners meeting, so I will try to probably have to cut out of there early to make it back for the commissioners meeting. The HAPO Center, I'm just glad to hear their willingness to work with current caterers and people that are out there. It sounds like it should be very successful. I think that promoting the HAPO Center, I believe, will benefit local businesses and the residents. I think we made the right decision, and I think it will benefit everyone that's involved out there. So, thank you.
My last week was the Port of Pasco, which is in conflict with our Wednesday meetings now, and their meeting was in Connell. Could not get on virtually, so I was unable to attend that. Ben Franklin Transit, I made the announcement of the Veterans of Foreign Wars event to raise money to try to get a new facility in Benton County so that their 130-plus members have a place to meet. The building they're using now can only seat about 40 people. It has no parking. And the Veteran of Foreign Wars do all the flag presentations. They do all the 21 gun salutes for military personnel. They do a great justice to our community. I made the announcement of this event they had, and sure enough, she was there, the general manager, Rochelle Glacier, and helped raise money and did a great job. In fact, met with the guy from the VFW about setting up Ben Franklin Transit to help move around the veterans. So it was a great event, raised a lot of money, but we need help from our, and maybe we can bring this up Monday at our bi-county meeting about getting a building over there for these veterans so they can meet and keep up the good work. The agenda meeting on Friday, got a phone call from a resident yesterday about the access for the church on Taylor Flats, and I came in that way this morning and viewed it. It's got a hill, a blind spot. There is a exit lane to get into that church, but there's no on-ramp to get, and plus the crossing traffic. I do believe he's right, and he said he was going to be here today. We're going to have accidents there. And I've been told that churches don't have to abide by all the rules that the rest of us have to about access. And so I don't know what's going on there, but we need to, maybe I'm going to get a hold of Mr. Erdman and ask to look at that situation. And then on, it was last week, we had an accident on Hooper Road. I was turning on and off circles. A hay truck was going up the road. He was going southbound on Hooper Road, which is a gravel road, and a pickup hit him in the back end. He was going 25, creating a bunch of dust because he was a fully loaded hay truck. A pickup hit him in the backside, and the estimated speed was 80 miles an hour. Wow. And that driver did not know if there was another car coming alongside that truck to go by it, because everybody slows down in the dust. But this is, and the response by the sheriffs, they were there within 10 minutes. And I got to give them kudos. They did a great job getting there, getting the vehicle that was on the road completely destroyed off the road so that we still had access. So I want to give a shout out to our sheriff's department, and I'm just asking people out there, drive reasonably. If you're on a gravel road, don't be going 80 mile an hour, because you're going to be putting people's lives in danger. So with that, we'll move down to elected and department head business. Is there any elected or department heads that would like to come forward? Seeing none, administration office business. Mr. Gonzalez?
None today, sir.
None today. Back down to public comment. Is there anybody for public comment? Seeing nobody come forward, we don't have no phones. Do we have any executive sessions?
No, sir.
Is there any other business for the good of the county? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.